Hi and welcome to this week's Retvlog, where we talk about Retribution Paladin things, and I'm going to base it on a few questions or statements I've had coming my way. So this is going to be about tier. We talked a little bit about tier in terms of sims last week, as well as gemming and enchanting, and of course Blade of Justice, which is a bit of a weird one. It's been a weird ability, or the ability has changed its nature a little bit. With Tomb of Sargeras, there were a few things happened. First of all, we had the extra traits, which meant that Blade of Justice, one of the traits, of course, increases its damage. And so Blade of Justice does do more damage. We've got a couple of traits on our Ashbringer that straight up increase the damage of Blade of Justice. We had the tier bonus that also increases its effectiveness, really, because it generates 3 holy power as opposed to 2. But of course, we would lose that ability if we went from 4 set tier 20 to 4 set tier 21, because we have to just knock down and lose that one at least. So in terms of tier as well, obviously if you've been working through Tomb of Sargeras and therefore have access to tier 20, and then you're working through Antaros and you now have some access to tier 21, not necessarily full access. If you had full access to tier 20 and 21 at the equivalent level, so heroic to heroic or mythic to mythic or whatever, then yeah, you would use the 4 set tier 21, because with high enough item level, it will pull ahead. But the bonus itself, the tier 21 bonus, is ahead with everything else being equal, the tier 20. But at the same time, it's important not to blow it out of proportion. So the comment I had here, I'll read it out first, then sort of go through it. It says, I'd like to ramble about Ret tier 20 versus tier 21. Most people I knew were extremely unhappy with losing tier 21 4 set for a good reason. It's a good bonus. I looked at it and thought about it, and after having gotten tier 21 4 set myself, I kind of feel like tier 21 4 set is just as strong as tier 20. Tier 24 set causes problems. I frequently find myself at 3 holy power with Righteous Verdict buff active. Due to also having tier 22 set, my Blade of Justice hit just as hard as Templar's Verdict. I was in a position where I had to choose, do I use TV and overwrite my Righteous Verdict, or do I use Blade of Justice and overcap 1 holy power? Neither choice felt good, and this predicament was because Blade generated 3 holy power. Tier 21 4 set alleviates that problem. I haven't been in that situation once, and I haven't felt holy power starved like I thought I would either. In short, I feel like the tier 21 set bonuses are actually pretty good. And you can understand that point of view, and for some people, actually, even though a lot of people wish that the Blade of Justice generate 3 holy power was baked into somehow baseline, there is that point of view, and it's a very valid point that yes, you will sometimes get into a situation where using Blade of Wrath, you don't want to, when Blade of Justice is active, you want to keep it off cooldown as much as possible so you're not wasting procs, because they won't get banked up or anything like that. And so that sometimes might mean overcapping. You're on 3 holy power already. Ideal world, of course, in that situation, you would spend quickly, but what if you can't? What if you're waiting for Judgment to come off, for a second or so? So what do you do in that situation? And this one alleviates it, because the 4 set tier 21 reduces the holy power required. So it sort of works in a similar way. Judgment means that you use Judgment, and then for your next spender it'll cost a holy power fewer. So it's almost like having a free... It's almost like Judgment generates a holy power without the possibility of overcapping. So from that point of view, the tier 21 4 set is pretty good. And this is also why it's always worth simming. So what you'll find is... in my position, I'm ideally waiting for being able to have 4 pieces of Mythic tier 21. At the moment, I don't have any. So when I'm in a position where I can have 4 pieces of Mythic tier 21, there's no argument about it. I will be better off taking the 4 set tier 21 over my 4 set tier 20. However, there might be a scenario where with some heroic pieces, I mean, this is what's really annoying. I've been desperately trying to get even just the heroic legs. Can't even get those. They just won't. I just can't get them. And that might open me up to being able to do it at a slightly lower item level with everything else considered. That's why it's always really important to sim yourself. What you probably find is, you might find that going for tier 21, if you do prefer that bonus, might sim only a small DPS downgrade. And a small DPS downgrade for something that you feel more comfortable with could actually end up being a DPS upgrade, because whatever you feel most comfortable with is usually better. It's why we always say, if you're a pure DPS class, Obviously, it's ideal to be able to play each of those specs for that same role, because then you can play what is best for a particular encounter. But if there's one that you're really not comfortable with, you're not going to play it as well. So you are actually better off playing a weaker spec that you're strong with, that you're good at, than a stronger spec that you're not so good at. And then the same sort of thing applies here for us who only have the one DPS spec. But the choice of gear, if there's a particular set of gear which you are much more comfortable with, it can work out as a DPS upgrade. We have to remember that sims are only accurate as far as we are playing out the encounter as the sim thinks we are. Remember, things like fight length are included in that. But also, are we actually playing our decisions the same as the sim assumes it is? And the further away we move away from what the sim assumes, the less reliable those sims are anyway. That's not an excuse for ignoring them, but you just have to sort of bear in mind. If you're doing your sims and you're thinking, well, all right, it says that I should still keep my 4-set tier 20, but it's like a 0.5% in it. What's 0.5% really? Not that much. So if you'd prefer the tier 21, or you just want to abandon it, you just think to yourself, do you know what, I'm sick of it. Let's just let the tier 20 die. I'll just get the tier 21. Then that can be a potentially good reason as well. Now, coming on to the Blade of Justice, that is, and you do have the 4-set tier 20, let's say. That is always a bit of an issue. You have to bear in mind that, yes, all things considered, and different people have different traits, remember. So your actual difference between Templar's Verdict damage and Blade of Justice damage can vary a little. It's not easy to tell just looking at the tooltips, because there's a few things that change it. So also the fact Blade of Justice is physical damage, Templar's Verdict's holy damage. So you always have to bear in mind, bosses have, I was trying to ask this earlier, couldn't get a definitive answer. Bosses have about 30% physical reduction because of armor. It's about 30%. I can't remember what the exact figure is. It may be exactly 30% actually, but I don't remember that. I was trying to ask and no one was able to tell me. But so you have to bear in mind that the tooltip for Blade of Justice, that's not what it's actually going to do on a raid boss. But then think about all the other things as well. Remember, there's traits that can potentially increase the damage of Blade of Justice, which isn't reflected. One of the traits is reflected in the tooltip, not the other. The other thing is, of course, Templar's Verdict you're likely to be doing against a target that's got the Judgment debuff active. So then there's the Mastery that's going to be added onto that damage as well. And also you've got your Mimic on Templar's Verdict, Echo of the High Lord trait that does an extra 10% damage on top of that as well. So using tooltips, not that straightforward. But if you look through your logs, look through the logs at a particularly a long fight, where you're going to be using plenty of Blades of Justice and Templar's Verdict, you can look at the average hit for each one, and you usually see that there's not much in it. Templar's Verdict usually comes out a bit ahead, but not necessarily by that much. So that's why sometimes you think to yourself, well, obviously, you use builders until the general priority is use builders to build holy power. Unless you're going to overcap, then your priority becomes making sure the Judgment debuff is on the target and then using spenders. But there's various things that throw that out. Our 2-set tier 21 bonus means that Judgment does quite a lot of damage on its own as well. So that's that's not just there to put a debuff on your target. The damage it does is not a tiny amount. And especially with everything considered, it means we want to get more and more and more mastery. As you get more and more and more mastery, Judgment itself does more damage as well, out of proportion to the amount of extra damage that's going to be done by that Templar's Verdict. And then you think to yourself, well, Blade of Justice, how much damage does it do? Even if it doesn't do as much damage as a Templar's Verdict quite, it's not far off. We also have to bear in mind that it's also a definitive extra Templar's Verdict there. But if you're on 3 Holy Power already, it's only going to give you 2 Holy Power, in which case, it's doing 2/3 of a Templar's Verdict in terms of what it's generating. So there's all sorts of things to go in the mix there. Obviously, it's not ideal to waste it. What you would ideally do if you can, if you think about it this way, if you've got 3 Holy Power, then in most situations you should be able to spend anyway. So it's not like, you have to use Blade of Justice the second it comes off cooldown. Use a spender by all means, if possible, then use the Blade of Justice, then you can use a spender again. That's an ideal situation to be in if you can. It doesn't matter, delaying it by a second is not going to lose you procs in all likelihood. It might lose you one every now and then, but it's going to be quite infrequent. So, yeah, don't be too worried about that. But I can certainly see why some people would say, well, although it's nice to know that as soon as you use a Blade of Justice, you can definitely spend, no matter even if you had no Holy Power to begin with. And it is quite nice. I mean, as an Alliance player going in on the pull, it is quite nice to just be able to go in. Blade of Justice, because it's got that range on it. You can do it as you're running in. Blade of Justice, Judgment, Crusade, and then Templar's Verdict, Wake of Ashes, Templar's Verdict. Bit of a, you know, and that could Blade of Justice potentially then, or Crusader Strike, whatever, to spend again. And you get yourself into a nice little sequence. But that same sequence is still possible with the Tier 21 force set, because when you've used your Judgment, remember, even though you've only generated 2 Holy Power, you can still use a spender. So the opener doesn't actually have to change. It's just a little bit weird in terms of getting used to it, really, because later on in the fight, it's not all, because sometimes you will use more than one Blade of Justice between judgments. If you only ever used one Blade of Justice between judgment, wouldn't actually notice the difference. But you know, there are times when you can use more because of that Blade of Wrath prac. So I think it just takes some practice with it. But if you're getting to the point where you're simming and it's not much between it, and you just feel like, just to hell with it, let's just get the Tier 21 full set done, you know you're going to be getting there eventually, then I would just say embrace it, go with it. Now, when it comes to enchants and gems, I had a Twitter question about gemming haste and mastery. So, with this one, my personal take on it is this. I would like round about 30-ish% haste. Haste can be a bit of a comfort thing. What I would say is, it's always really difficult. People always want me to say, all right, should I, yeah, I've got this much haste, should I get more? And I look, if they say something like 18%, which I was asked recently, my answer is, well, yes, you should, but you should still sim each piece of gear to see if it's an upgrade or not. But at the same time, I would not be comfortable with that. I've got, at the moment, depending on what trinkets and stuff I use, somewhere between 22 and 24% haste. The 22% haste, I'm not at all happy with. I want more than that. I would ideally like about 30%. Now, the 30% is not a magic number. It's a roundabout number as well. And there's a couple of reasons. First of all, with the Whisper of the Nathrezim, if you use the Cloak, now, of course, if you're using 6 set bonus, you won't be using the Cloak just yet. Eventually, again, everything will be high enough level, that item level, that will just abandon Tier 20 completely, and we will be able to use the Cloak. Some people are already, and that's great. Because Cloak and Soul of the High Lord are a pretty good combination if you can use those. And, you know, the figure get bandied around, I think, is about 31.25%. Simply because it allows you an extra global cooldown between each one. Because the thing with Whisper of the Nathrezim, the Legendary Cloak, is you use a spender, and that gives you like a few seconds, 4 seconds, to use another spender if you want to continue the buff. And if you can't do that, you're not actually getting any benefit from that Legendary. 0 benefit. It does nothing when you use a spender, unless you used a spender no more than 4 seconds before it, and you don't want to leave it as much as 4 seconds. So the usual thing we would consider with a reasonable amount of haste is 2 globals between each one. So it's like use a spender, couple of globals, then another spender, couple of globals, then another spender, to maintain that buff for as long as possible. Now, if you get enough haste, you can potentially get an extra global out of it, and that's the whole idea of this 31.25%-ish. But round about 30%, even without the Cloak, can be also pretty nice as well. In terms of our just general set bonuses, the Tier 21 set bonuses, that can also be pretty good. So what I would generally say in terms of enchants and gems, I would still say in general go for haste. That's what I've enchanted and gemmed. If I got to the position where I had over 30% haste, and it would never drop below 30% haste, no matter which, because various things can affect it. Like from fight to fight, I might change my trinkets, I might change my legendaries. Okay, think about all the different sets you might change between doing content, whether it be Mythic Plus or different raid bosses, whatever the content is that you do. If in your lowest haste set, it's still at least 30%, then I would say, okay, in that situation, you could be enchanting mastery. Well, don't drop below the 30% though. But again, don't treat 30% as a magic number, but about 30%, should we say. So, but that's what I would do. I would say, at the point at which my haste is going significantly above 30%, to the point where I know it will never go below it, at that point, I would maybe advise gemming and enchanting more mastery, because we're always going to get benefit from more mastery. at some point. But I think for a lot of people, the gear is not in that situation. So I think the majority of people are probably still going to benefit, in my opinion, from gemming and enchanting haste. And it's not, I mean, I obviously don't run sims on loads and loads of people. I run sims on myself mostly. I occasionally run sims on, you know, standard sets of gear and things like that to see what's better. But that's what I would say. If people want, and I know, you know, there's been a bit of a meme on the Paladin Discord, the Ret Paladin Discord in particular, because whenever anyone asks a question, the stock answer is always sim it. And that is the best answer. Unfortunately, that is the best answer. But if people do want a hard and fast answer that won't steer them too far wrong, bear in mind that any hard and fast answer will always steer you a little bit wrong. If you don't want to be steered too far wrong on it, what I would say is gem and enchant haste. But if your haste is getting over 30%, and you know you're not going to drop below 30% no matter what trinkets and legendaries you equip, or what combination of gear you equip, then in that case, yeah, sure, gem and enchant mastery. So I hope that helps out there. Now, there are, of course, another few things, just to finish off questions I do get asked now and then, in terms of the old neck, hidden satyr or trained soldier. So that is a straight up sim it. I'm using trained soldier now at the moment. Especially bear in mind the content I do for, like, hidden satyr is a bit like Potion of the Old War, because that's the other question. That single target benefit doesn't really benefit you in AoE situations. And there's quite a lot of AoE cleave situations in not only in Taurus, and then when you go in Mythic Plus, of course, there's AoE situations there. So that's why that neck enchant is becoming a bit more common now. So it might be time to switch over to that if you hadn't already. And then when it comes to the potions, I would still say take both. Take Old War, take Prolonged Power, because general uses are, if you're in a single target phase, then use Old War. Old War still pulls ahead for pure single target situations. The time to use Prolonged Power is if there's going to be any cleave, even as few as 2 targets for most of the duration, then use that. The other situation to use Prolonged Power is on the pull. If you're not going to use wings at the pull, and there are a couple of fights where you won't, particularly on Mythic, Portal Keeper being one example, Kingaroth being the other, you save those for your first priority target. So if you're in the Portal group on Portal Keeper, then you'll use it on the first Portal boss. And if on Kingaroth, which I've not even done yet on Mythic, but you know, on Kingaroth, Mythic people save their wings for the ads because it spaces out really nicely then use Prolonged Power because you get a little bit of use of the potion when you're going on that ad as well during wings. So hopefully that answers a few very common questions. Let me know in comments below if it doesn't, so you want to clarify anything, or if there's a completely different question you want me to answer as well, and I'll go through that at some point. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps. If you're first time to my channel, subscribe. Check out the playlist for the Retribution Paladin stuff. There's several things there. Share it with other people who might be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.